The dust did not settle, not really. It just moved from the air to the skin, a fine, gritty shroud that clung to the 10 of them where they waited by the dry trough at the edge of town. They were ghosts made of bone and tired leather, their silence a stone dropped into the well of the town's afternoon noise. The sun beat on them without pity, baking the cracked earth and the resignation on their faces. Among them, a woman, younger than some, older than her years, kept her gaze fixed on the frayed edge of her own sleeve. Her hands were still, resting in her lap, but the stillness was a cage she had built around a tremor. To look up was to meet the eyes of the townspeople, eyes that stripped and weighed and dismissed. So she looked down, at the dust, at the fraying thread, at the end of things. The people of redemption passed them like they were rocks or unfortunate shrubbery. Women pulled their children closer, their whispers sharp as cactus spines. Men leaned in doorways, thumbs hooked in belts, their stares a violation. They had been pushed to this edge, harried down from the mesas, their lands and lives a rumor behind them. Now they were just a problem, a piece of unpleasantness to be ignored until it went away. The old man who led them, his face a map of droughts and sorrows, stood with a kind of brittle dignity, his eyes on the horizon as if he could will a different future into existence just by staring hard enough. But the horizon offered only more heat, more dust. Then, a new sound. The slow, deliberate creak of a wagon, the plod of a single, heavy horse. A man pulled up, not at the general store, but near the trough. He was tall and thin as a fence rail, folded into himself by solitude or grief. Dust clung to him too, not as a shroud, but as a second skin earned from the land. His coat was worn, the color of the dirt, his hat pulled low. He did not look at the town. He looked at the 10 figures huddled in the merciless sun. Elias dismounted, his movements economical, wasting nothing. He had seen them from a distance, a dark knot of stillness against the shimmering heat. He had felt the town's gaze slide off them, hostile and indifferent. He carried whole winters in his eyes, the memory of a house gone quiet, of a small plot of earth on a hill that held everything he had lost. He knew what it was to be weathered down to the bone. He moved to his horse, unhooking a canteen. He didn't approach the group directly. Instead, he walked to the old man, the one who stood apart and held it out. No words, just the offer. The old man's eyes, cloudy with age and sun, met his. There was a long, silent moment of appraisal. He saw not pity in Elias's face, but a kind of flat, weary recognition. The elder gave a slow, formal nod and took the canteen. He drank, then passed it to the woman with the caged hands. She flinched when it was offered, her eyes darting up for a split second to catch the stranger's silhouette against the blinding sky before she looked down again, taking the water. Elias turned back to his wagon. He pulled out a small sack of coins, the sound of them clinking together unnaturally loud in the charged air. He walked into the general store, the bell above the door jangling its announcement. The whispers inside ceased. He bought flour, bacon, coffee, beans. More than one man needed. The storekeeper, a man named Hobbs with a fleshy, suspicious face, counted the items. "Got company, Elias?" Hobbs asked, his voice slick with insinuation. Elias just looked at him, his gaze level and empty. He didn't have to say a word. The question withered in the silence. He paid, loaded the supplies, and walked back out into the sun. He looked at the old man again, then gestured with his head toward the open, empty land that stretched away from the town. "There's water at my place," he said. His voice was rough, like it came from under floorboards, unused to the air. "Shelter." The old man stared at him, then at his people, at the children with listless eyes, at the woman who wouldn't look up. He saw the hard faces of the town, and then the hard, unreadable face of this solitary man. He gave another slow nod. It was not a claiming. It was an offering, a release. He was freeing them not from ropes, but from the cage of 1,000 hostile eyes. As Elias climbed back onto his wagon, the 10 of them rose, a slow, rustling movement, and began to follow. The dust lifted behind them like ghosts finally given leave to depart. The journey was a silent procession. Elias kept the pace slow, the plod of his horse a steady, hypnotic rhythm against the vast, humming quiet of the plains. The sun beat down, but out here, away from the judgment of the town, it felt cleaner, more honest in its brutality. He didn't look back, but he could feel them behind him, a string of shadows trailing his wagon. He could feel their exhaustion, their watchfulness. It was a language he understood better than words. Once he stopped, pulling a second canteen from the wagon and leaving it on a rock by the side of the rough track. He didn't wait to see who picked it up. It was a gesture left for the emptiness, a message that provision existed here, without demand or witness. His ranch appeared first as a smudge on the horizon, then slowly resolved into a collection of low, weathered buildings that seemed to be hunkering down against the wind. It was a lonely place, stark and spare. A small house, a sturdy barn, a web of corrals. Everything was functional, stripped of ornament, worn down to its essential purpose. The land itself felt like it was holding its breath. On a low hill overlooking the homestead stood a single, weathered wooden cross, the grass around it trimmed, a patch of tended earth in a sea of wildness. He pulled the wagon to a halt near the barn and got down. The 10 of them stopped a respectful distance away, waiting. They looked at the house, at the barn, their faces impassive. Elias pointed to the barn. Its great doors stood slightly ajar, offering a dark, cool interior. "You can stay there," he said to the old man. He gestured toward the well. "Water's fresh." He unloaded the sacks of flour and beans, the slab of bacon, and the coffee. He set them on the ground near the barn door, a silent offering. He established the rules of this new world not with a speech, but with a series of simple, profound actions. Here is food. Here is shelter. Here is water. He looked at them for a moment, a group of tired, displaced people staring back at him with an ancient, weary patience. Then he turned and walked toward his own small house, the space between them filled with an unspoken contract. He did not latch his door behind him. The first days unfolded in a shared silence, 2 separate currents of life flowing in parallel. Elias rose before the sun, his routine as fixed as the North Star. He milked his 1 cow, mended the endless tapestry of his fences, worked the dry soil of a small vegetable patch. His movements were deliberate, his focus absolute. He was a man who had learned to fill the gaping hole of his life with the solid presence of work. From the barn, the Apache families watched him. They were a quiet presence, their own routines emerging from the ashes of their old lives. The women tended the children, cooked over a small, smokeless fire, their voices low murmurs. The men sat together, speaking in their own tongue, their hands busy repairing tools or restringing a bough. They moved with a quiet grace, taking up no more space than was necessary. The woman Elias had first noticed, the one with the haunted stillness, he never saw her look at him directly, but he was aware of her. He would catch a flicker of movement from the corner of his eye and know she was there, her gaze on him for a moment before she turned away. He learned the shape of her sorrow by the way she held her shoulders, the way she never smiled. One morning, he came out of his house to find the porch swept clean. The packed dirt was smooth, marked with the faint, pleasing pattern of a brush made from twigs. He stopped, his hand on the doorframe, and looked at the small, careful act of order. He said nothing. The next day, a small, tightly woven basket appeared on the edge of the porch. It was empty, a perfect little vessel of woven grass, intricate and strong, a gift with no name attached. He left it there for a day before taking it inside, placing it on the rough-hewn mantelpiece in his empty house. A week passed. He was repairing a harness near the barn when he saw her walking toward the low hill, toward the single grave. She held a small, tight clutch of purple wildflowers she must have walked miles to find. He watched as she stood before the wooden cross for a long moment, her head bowed. He saw her kneel and carefully place the flowers at its base. She was not trespassing on his grief. She was acknowledging it. stitching her own sorrow to his with a thread of silent understanding. That evening he butchered a rabbit he'd snared. He left half of it by the barn door, along with a piece of hard cheese and a small tin of peaches he had been saving. The unspoken conversation continued, a dialogue of gestures. The town did not forget. One afternoon, a rider appeared. It was Hobbs, the storekeeper, his horse kicking up a cloud of officious dust. He reined in, his gaze sweeping over the barn, where two of the Apache men were mending a net. His lip curled. "Heard you were running a charity case out here, Elias," he called out, his voice loud and contemptuous. Elias walked slowly out from behind the corral, wiping his hands on a rag. He stood between Hobbs and the barn, a silent wall. "They're helping with chores." The lie was thin, but it was a shield. "Chores?" Hobbs scoffed. "You watch your back. They're savages." "They're on my land," Elias said, his voice flat, leaving no room for argument. "And you're at the edge of it. Keep riding." Hobbs hesitated, looking from Elias's stony face to the silent figures by the barn. He spat on the ground, a final, petty act of defiance, and wheeled his horse around, riding off. When he was gone, Elias turned. The woman was standing in the shadow of the barn door, watching him. For the first time, their eyes met and held for more than a second. In her gaze, he saw not gratitude, but a flicker of something else. Recognition, a shared enemy repelled. The cold came early that year, a sharp bite in the wind that whispered of snow. The nights grew longer, the darkness deeper. One night, a scream tore through the quiet of the ranch. It was thin and raw, a sound of pure terror. Elias was out of his bed in an instant, pulling on his boots, grabbing the old rifle by the door. He found the source in the barn. The woman was huddled in a corner, her arms wrapped around herself, shaking violently. The old man was beside her, speaking to her in low, soothing tones, but she seemed not to hear. Her eyes were wide, fixed on something only she could see. A nightmare had breached the walls of her waking life. Elias stopped in the doorway, the rifle held loose at his side. He watched the old man try to comfort her, his touch gentle. He saw the other families gathered, their faces etched with a shared, familiar pain. He understood. This was not a new terror, but an old one, revisited in sleep. He lowered the rifle and quietly retreated to his house. He stoked the fire in his hearth until it blazed, casting warm, dancing shadows on the walls. He put a pot of coffee on to boil. Then he returned to the barn. He did not go to her. He spoke to the old man. "Bring her to the house," he said softly. "It's warmer." The old man looked at him, his gaze searching. He saw the open door of the house, the firelight spilling out like a promise. He nodded. With the help of another woman, he guided the trembling figure out of the barn and across the cold, dark yard. She flinched as she crossed the threshold, as if expecting a blow or a locked door. But Elias just stood by the fire, his back to her, giving her space. He poured 3 cups of coffee, the aroma filling the small, quiet room. He set one on the table near where the old man guided her to a chair. He took one himself and gave the third to the elder. They sat in the flickering light, the 3 of them, for what felt like hours. No one spoke. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the ragged, slowly calming breaths of the woman. Elias stared into the flames, the heat a comfort against the chill that lived inside him. He felt her fear recede, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. He had offered his fire, a small fortress against the night, and in doing so had shared a piece of his own solitude. She finally lifted her head, her eyes clear now, but shadowed with the memory of her dream. She looked at him, a long, steady look. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice a thread of sound. It was the first time she had spoken directly to him. Elias shook his head, a small, barely perceptible movement. "No need," he said. He pushed a plate with a piece of leftover cornbread across the table toward her. She looked at it, then back at him. Slowly, she reached out a trembling hand and took it, She ate, the simple act of sustenance a tether to the solid, real world. The bread was dry, a little stale. A small, ironic smile touched her lips for a second, so faint it was barely there. "That loaf died in vain," she said, her voice impossibly quiet. Elias felt the corner of his own mouth twitch. "You didn't complain about mine." The shared moment of dry humor, as fragile as a moth's wing, hung in the air between them. It was more intimate than a touch, more eloquent than a speech. It was the first stone laid in the foundation of a trust that had, until now, been built only of silence. The fire burned down to embers, and in the warm, quiet dark, something had shifted. The house, for the first time in a very long time, felt a little less empty. The thaw came not as a sudden flood, but as a slow, almost imperceptible melting at the edges. The routine held, but it was different now. The parallel lines of their lives began to curve toward each other. The woman, he still did not know her name, began to leave a cup of hot, bitter coffee on his porch rail each morning before he rose. He, in turn, started leaving a pail of fresh milk by the barn door, still warm from the cow. She took over the small patch of land beside his wife's grave. With a tool fashioned from a sharpened stick, she cleared the wild grass, her movements patient and methodical. She did not disturb the grave itself, but around it, she cultivated the earth, preparing it for what he did not know. He watched her from a distance, this quiet act of creation next to his monument of loss. Felt right somehow, a balancing of scales. The children, who had at first been as silent and watchful as their parents, began to venture from the barn. They discovered the creek that ran behind the property, their laughter sometimes reaching him on the wind, a sound his ranch had not heard in years. One of the boys, small and brave, started following Elias on his chores, mimicking his walk, his hands shoved in imaginary pockets. Elias never acknowledged him directly, but he began leaving a spare apple on a fence post where the boy was sure to find it. The piece was a fragile skin stretched over a deep well of memory. It was broken by the sight of two riders on the horizon. They were not cowboys, not prospectors. They rode with the straight-backed certainty of men who wore a uniform, even when they were not. Their approach was a harbinger, a dark line drawn across the pale sky, pulling the past up with it. Elias saw them first. He was on the roof of the barn, replacing a rotten shingle. He stopped hammering, his body going still. He watched them come, his face grim. He knew this kind of authority. It was the kind that did not ask questions, that did not see people, only objectives. He climbed down the ladder just as the families were gathering, drawn by the sound of the approaching horses. The old man's face was a mask of stoicism, but his eyes were dark with foreboding. The woman stood near him, her hands clasped tight in front of her. She was not trembling now. She was rigid, a steel rod of defiance. The riders reined in, their horses sweating. The man in the lead was broad, his face sunburned and cruel. He wore the tarnished badge of a U.S. Marshal. His gaze swept over the scene, contemptuous and proprietary. It landed on one of the younger Apache men, a boy of no more than 17. "That one," the marshal said, pointing. His voice was like gravel grinding. "Cato. He's wanted for horse theft in the territory." Elias stepped forward, positioning himself between the marshal and the barn. The ground beneath his feet felt solid, his own land, a line to be defended. "He's been here for 2 months," Elias said, his voice low and steady. "Hasn't been off this ranch." "Don't matter," the marshal sneered. "The warrant is good. I'm taking him." He started to dismount, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "This is private property," Elias said. "You're not taking anyone." The marshal laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Are you telling me what to do, old man? You harboring fugitives now? That's a crime." He looked past Elias, at the Apache families huddled together. His eyes were cold, dismissive. He saw them not as people but as objects, inventory to be managed. "He's property of the U.S. government until he hangs." The word hung in the air, obscene and final. The boy, Cato, tensed, his eyes wide with fear. The other men moved subtly, forming a protective crescent around him. The air grew thick, electric with the threat of violence. The marshal's partner dismounted, unlooping a rope from his saddle. "Don't make this difficult, rancher. We have the law on our side." "The law's a long way from here," Elias said softly. "All I see are two men on my land, trying to take a boy who's done nothing but help me mend my fences." "He's an Apache," the marshal spat, as if that were the entire argument. "Now step aside." He took a step forward, his hand dropping to his pistol. Elias didn't move. He just stood there, a weathered, unmovable post driven deep into the earth. He was not a big man, not a fighter, but his stillness held a power the marshal hadn't anticipated. It was the power of a man with nothing left to lose, who had finally found something he refused to let go of. It was then that the woman stepped out from behind the old man. She moved past Elias, placing herself directly in the marshal's path. Her chin was lifted, her eyes blazing with a fire that seemed to consume the fear that had haunted her for so long. She spoke, and her voice, though not loud, carried across the yard with perfect, chilling clarity. She spoke in English, her words precise and sharp as flint. "His name is not Cato," she said. "That is the name you gave him. His name is Hania. It means spirit warrior, and he did not steal your horse. Your soldiers burned our village and scattered our herds. He took back one that belonged to his father." The marshal was so stunned by her sudden, articulate defiance that he froze for a second. He stared at her, this woman he had dismissed as another silent squaw. "You will not take him," she said. It was not a plea. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of a new reality. The marshal recovered, his face flushing with rage. "You shut your mouth," he snarled, raising a hand as if to strike her. Elias moved then, faster than he had in years. He didn't reach for his gun. He simply grabbed the marshal's wrist, his grip surprisingly strong, his knuckles white. "Don't," he said, his voice a low growl. The standoff held, taut and fragile. The marshal, his wrist caught in an iron grip, looked from Elias's cold, determined face to the woman's burning eyes. He saw the other Apaches, no longer a huddle of victims, but a unified front, their silence now a weapon. He saw the old man holding a weathered axe handle. He saw Hania holding a rock. He was on their land. He was outnumbered. And he saw in Elias's eyes that the man would die here before he yielded. With a curse, the marshal wrenched his arm free. He glared at them all, his authority broken, his cruelty revealed as simple cowardice. "This ain't over," he spat. He and his partner mounted their horses, their movements jerky with frustrated rage. They wheeled their animals around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of defeated dust in their wake. The silence they left behind was vast and profound. It was not an empty silence, but a full one, ringing with the echo of what had just happened. Hania, the boy, let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for days. The woman's shoulders slumped slightly, the rigid steel of her defiance softening now that the threat was gone. Elias turned to her. He looked at her, truly saw her, not as a symbol of sorrow, but as the architect of their victory. The fire in her eyes had banked, but it was still there, a warm, steady glow. He had never asked her name. It had seemed a trespass, a demand she was not ready to meet. Now, the question felt not like an intrusion, but a necessity, a recognition. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice quiet. She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw the ghost of a true smile on her lips. "My name is Lena," she said. "Elias, Lena." The names fell into the quiet space between them, two solid stones building a bridge. That night, the fire in his hearth burned brighter. They sat not in separate rooms or across a tense divide, but together, sharing a meal of rabbit stew that Lena had cooked. The old man was there, Hania too. The house was filled with the low murmur of their language, a sound that was no longer foreign, but a part of the house's own breathing. The unspoken contract of shelter had been broken and remade into something else entirely. It had been forged into a bond, sealed in the fire of a shared stand. In the days that followed, the ranch was transformed. The quiet, parallel lives merged into one. Elias formally asked the old man, whose name he learned was Taza, if they would stay. Not in the barn, but with him, to help him bring the ranch and himself back from the brink. Taza agreed with a solemn nod, his eyes full of a deep, quiet respect. It was a rebirth. Hania and the other young men worked with Elias, their combined strength rebuilding a section of corral that had collapsed years ago. The sound of hammers echoed in the clear air, a rhythm of construction, of a future being built nail by nail. The women, led by Lena, took over the house, airing out the rooms that had been sealed with grief, their presence chasing the dusty ghosts from the corners. Lena's garden by the grave began to flourish. She had planted corn, squash, and beans, the three sisters, their stalks rising strong and green from the earth she had so patiently tilled. New life grew beside the monument to the old, not erasing the past, but honoring it, promising a harvest yet to come. One day, Elias found his late wife's favorite shawl, a soft, woolen thing he had kept folded in a chest. He had never been able to part with it. He took it out, held it for a moment, the memory of its warmth in his hands, and then he walked outside and gave it to Lena as she worked in the garden. She took it without a word, her fingers brushing his, and wrapped it around her shoulders against the morning chill. It was a transfer, a letting go, and a welcome. The house, which had been a shell of memories, began to breathe again. Laughter, a sound Elias had forgotten, became a common thing. The youngest of the children, a little girl with eyes as bright as obsidian, started calling him by a name in her own language. Taza told him it meant Grandfather Oak. One evening, as the sun bled a blood-orange stain across the western sky, Elias and Lena sat on the porch steps. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer a void but a shared space, comfortable and deep. They watched the children chase fireflies in the growing dusk. They watched Taza smoking his pipe by the new corral. They watched the light fade from a sky that held no more threats, only the promise of stars. The house behind them was warm, filled with the smell of roasting corn and the soft sounds of a family settling in for the night. This was the final image, the resolution. A home not of blood, but of choice. A sanctuary built from the wreckage of two broken solitudes, now made whole. A story like this, it isn't just about a rescue. It isn't about a strong man saving a damsel, or a righteous man sheltering the poor. It's quieter than that. It's a story about the space between people, about how the deepest kindness is often unspoken, offered in a cup of water, a swept porch, a shared fire in the dead of night. It's about how decency can be a fortress, and courage can be found in the simple, stubborn act of standing your ground on a piece of land you call your own. All of us, we carry our own winters inside. We have our fallow fields, our silent houses haunted by what we've lost. And we wait, sometimes without knowing it, for a sign. For someone to see past the dust and the sorrow, to see the person underneath. To offer a place of shelter without demanding anything in return. So here's your naming. What is the name of the strength you've hidden away? What is the name of the kindness you're waiting to give or to receive? You don't always need a grand gesture or a loud declaration. Sometimes, all it takes is a steady gaze that says, I see you. Sometimes, all it takes is the courage to share your fire. And if you're brave enough to do that, you might just find that a home isn't four walls and a roof. It's the quiet promise that you don't have to face the storm alone.